So like John Galliano, when he first went to Dior, did an entire collection based on Lee's outfits. John Paul Gaultier always had admitted using a lot of reference to Lee's work. You know, Alexander McQueen, obviously, Anthony the Johnstons, you know, had used and kept pictures up of Lee and was a friend of his next to his bed for years. Pictures I'd taken, which was a cover on Frieze magazine. And more recently, there's a show just opening at Louis Vuitton Paris. Yes. I've forgotten who the designer is. Who designs for Louis Vuitton?
It's not Marc Jacobs?
Yes, Marc Jacobs. So Marc Jacobs just requested 2 months ago from me if he could have 3 or 4 of the pictures I took of Lee, because during the couture shows he was putting up a show of influences that it had on his work. And Lee and the costumes were one of them, and he put 3 big pictures up of mine there, and then you'll see there's a sort of stand and there's a girl in one of his designs with a huge puffball head, which is a complete reference to Lee. So you can see it still has this longevity of influence. Obviously Lady Gaga, you know, self-admitted. Lady Gaga requested to put images in a book of influences, some of the pictures. So yes, it carries on. And Nicki Minaj, I don't know whether she admits it, but she should do, because clearly there's a lot of things going on there too.
Yes, absolutely. Tell us about the camera that you used when you shot those pictures. How does it compare to today's digital camera?
Well, I mean, the first basic difference, it was film cameras. So at that time, I was shooting 2 things. I was shooting Hasselblad, and I was which is a 120 format, and also 4x5. And the 4x5 sheet film, large format, was because obviously I'd worked with Avedon. Avedon shot 8x10, but for budgetary reasons and stuff, I couldn't afford to shoot 8x10 because I was paying for everything. But I could shoot 4x5. So I shot a lot of it on 4x5, and the effect of that is much more structured because you have to fix the camera in set position, frame it, focus, then lock it down and put a sheet film in. It's sort of more in the classical tradition of framing a picture. Plus, in addition, because it's large format and the detail is that when you blow, or you can blow the pictures up much bigger, you'll retain the detail. So a lot of Lee, I felt a lot of Lee's costume was about the detail, about fabric and texture. And so shooting on 4x5, some of the pictures which are printed up today, 48 by 60 inches or larger, you'll see the texture of the fabric, or where the darning is between the 2 fabrics, and that's really important. So that was one. On the Hasselblad shot, because I like Hasselblad as film, it's very sharp, they use Zeiss lenses, arguably one of the sharpest cameras in the world, on quite slow emulsion films, which at the time meant more detail, less grain. And I'd been working again with Avedon, who used Rolleiflex 120, which again is the same shape, but on an 80mm lens, a slightly different look from the Hasselblad 80mm. So it was obviously a direct reference to that experience. Terence, when I'd worked with him, didn't use Hasselblad, and I mean, Terence was a great lighting technician, which is what I learned from Terence, but I wasn't overall with his viewpoint as to taking images or the representation of portraits didn't move me or excite me as much as Avedon did, and that's why I might have used the lighting techniques from Terence and Avedon, but predominantly I had more flexibility with Terence's, but the camera technique and capturing the image was more on Avedon's influences. As far as digital and film, you know, digital we weren't using digital then. You know, Lee died before we used digital. So digital, yes, it's used now, but it wasn't the digital age. The images will be printed digitally today in a photographic fashion, because that's predominantly how the big printing processes take place. But it wasn't ever captured digitally.
Right. Do you prefer color photography or black and white?
I think it's like horses for courses. I think it's like different things need to be or should be represented in different mediums, and often one medium, black and white, is better to achieve something than colour. But saying that, that's sort of luxury. I think it's alright if you're doing your own projects, but yes, I did always my own projects, which I could decide and determine however I did them myself, but a lot of work I did was commissioned assignment work, and so you don't necessarily have the luxury, certainly today, of making decisions. They'll say, we want a colour portrait of this person. It may not necessarily be the strongest image you can capture given the situation, but that is the demand of working for somebody else and fulfilling the brief and the assignment. You probably like having to take pictures around it. And also now it's slightly different, because in the digital age you'll still do a capture using a raw file which will have all the data in colour, and you then adjust it to black and white.
Right.
In the old days, or not so long ago, and arguably still today, you shoot black and white or colour film.
That's right. And do you believe in manipulating images after taking photographs?
Not especially. I mean, retouching before digital retouching and Photoshop, which made it accessible, you'd still have hand retouching. And, you know, some things just perhaps needed it because they were a distraction. You know, there was something which, you know, I'm not saying some distractions good in pictures, but some things aren't necessarily good. And so you would do it, but it was very expensive, very time consuming. So perhaps you didn't, the inclination wasn't automatically to jump in and change things. Today, obviously, Photoshop, it makes it so accessible to change so much that almost the creative image becomes at the rear in the production aspect, the post-production, rather than actually taking it. And I've heard so often people say, that's fine, don't worry about it, we can always fix it afterwards. Well, that's not what about taking a picture is to me. It's about it's capturing that moment. So because I believe so strongly in the moment, that I'm not keen on that much manipulation because it doesn't become any longer representative of the moment. But I do like a lot of work by people, let's say like Greenberg or even Nick Knight or Rankin, who use a lot of digital manipulation, and that's fine and they're very interesting images in their own right, but they're not pictures particularly I'd want to take myself.
Right. How would you describe photography as an art form?
Well, I mean, how would I describe it as an art form? Okay, we would take the basis, it is an art form. I mean, the fine art photography and classical traditional photography, it's sort of up to more recently, it was quite a difficult area because you would have in galleries who represented photography, you know, the likes of classic, you know, Penn, Avedon prints for sale, Cartier-Bresson, Arnold Newman and people like that, Robert Frank. And then obviously what happened, you started getting artists who realised, more contemporary artists, to use it as a medium, photography, as fine art. So you get, you know, people like Sarah Lucas, or you get Sam Taylor Wood, who were using it. But there was a disparity in the pricing structure and the commercial aspect of it. So you could go and buy a Richard Avedon print, a limited edition print, a fantastic hand-printed fibre print of a classical image of his for £2,500, and yet you'd have someone like Sam Taylor Wood who really didn't know much about technique photography, who'd be selling a portrait of hers as National Portrait Gallery for £19,000. So there was a huge sense of unfairness, perhaps from the classically driven, trained photographers, that they were sucking a certain amount of the energy out of the business. But that sort of, like in all things, has managed to reconcile, and now you'll see fine art galleries, photography galleries like you know, the Gagosian or a Michael Hoppen gallery in London, who you have a combination. It's different things, it's a different technique, it's a different approach, and everything has its thing, and everything finds its market.
Right.